appreciate the invitation. I'm not going to speak very long today in light of the fact, of course, being Sunday, and I know we all are getting ready for tomorrow, but also in consideration of the fact that I'd like first to share, some comments and information and so forth today. So I won't do my usual 2-hour kind of thing. I'll try to hold it down and mainly open up because I think we can both gain a good deal by just sort of talking to each other as such. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our education of our children and why, to kind of give an outline of why so many of our children seem to have difficulty in the educational process as such. I want to begin, though, by emphasizing what I see as one of the major functions of education. And I have to emphasize this again and again. I think it's necessary for us to emphasize it because I think we as African Americans sort of misinterpret what education is about. Frequently I run into, in my classroom, of course, people who are in that classroom to get credits. And they see education as one of getting credits and as one of qualifying for jobs. And to a good extent, they see education as a whole as basically that of getting jobs. And I think that's an unfortunate view of what education is and what it is about. And that kind of view of education does not prepare you for mastery, but it continues, that point of view continues to prepare you for continued subjugation. Every culture engages in education. Every culture, there's no culture that does not educate. That's the culture educates its children, either through its ritual, through its defining the role of male, female, age groups, or something of that nature, even to teaching maybe bows and arrows, how to make fires, how to cook, how to plant, how to fish, how to gather, if it's even at that level, fruits, or how to maintain the organization of the society itself. That is education. The principal function being that of maintaining the interest of the group and advancing the interest of the group. And that is what education is about. Now then, we must recognize as a people then that education is basically about maintaining the interest of African people and advancing the interests of African people. Even though on a certain level it looks like it's one for jobs, and certainly it's one for jobs, but then we have to look at it in the overall context and recognize that education is concerned with survival. And we are, at this point, at the crossroads as a people. And we have to confront the issue whether we will survive as a people in the future. Quite often we can run into meetings that talk about struggling for liberation, which is great, and we certainly have to get into that, and we should be a part of that, obviously. We certainly get into meetings talking about job equality and so forth and so on, but I don't see enough meetings in our society about what's going to go on in the year 2050, what's happening in the year 2001. Quite often I find that we are a little short-sighted and we're not looking far enough in the future. This kind of present-orientedness we have to get rid of. We see it in our children, which quite often hampers their intellectual functioning as well as their social and other kind of functioning. And we still see it too often, even in the black adult, even the educated black adult. It is necessary for a person who is to competently deal with reality to look at three things simultaneously. And that is, of course, past, present, and future. If you look at them disjointedly, they're going to cause terrific problems. There are some of us who are hung up in the past, caught up in it, and we miss a lot. There are many of us, I could say the bulk of us, who are caught up in the present and who are concretely caught up with what's going on now. Maybe we are 5 years in front of ourselves, but that's not far enough. It is important, and one of the beautiful things about man's ability is that he can compare the past with the present and see how the past is interacting with the present. And he sees that there's some kind of lawful relationship between past and present. And he sees that some kind of, and he can look then at that interaction that goes on between past and present, the immediate moment, and get some sense of where the future is going. Now then, he's not caught up though and determined in terms of that future, because he can project into the future, and he can look at probabilities, probable outcomes, based on what he sees immediately. He can get an idea, well, this will probably occur, this will probably occur, this will probably occur. Based on that projection, he can then come back into the present and influence the present, so as to influence the probabilities of the future. And he can say, well, since this is going this way and this way and this way, I don't want this to happen. If it keeps going the way it's going now, it's going to lead to a place I really don't want it to go. And based on this projection, let me influence what is going on now to change the probabilities. So even though the future is determined, it does not mean that man cannot help to determine that future. You see? And therefore, we as a people must look ahead. Look at what's occurring now, look at what has happened in the past and how it is interacting with the present now, project into this future, and then work on this immediate present to bring about the kind of future world that we want to have. You see? So it's very important for us to build and develop that kind of mentality. If you have a people, though, who are present-oriented and job-oriented, and who see education merely as something as a means for qualifying and getting jobs, these are people who quite often are going to be swept by events instead of controlling events and creating a future, but who fall into the future quite often into a state of shock and with an inability to deal with the events that occur in that future. And the future now, and just one of the things about the Caucasian is extremely future-oriented. And he looks 200-300 years or more ahead of himself and uses those projections to operate in the current world. One of the major areas, of course, you see this is in the area of science fiction. I've lamented the fact, I think when I heard over when I started over here today, Margaret Walker's book, The Color Purple, I believe it is, that's out now. Is it being considered for Pulitzer Prize, or did it win one, or what have you, you know, and that's very good. That's interesting. And of course, it's also interesting as a sidelight that we have so many, and this is not a statement against females, but it's just a puzzle, that our females, black females, are getting very good recognition for their work. And I'm wondering, of course, what's happening to the black male in literature here. You know, we get Toni Morrison and Angelou and, of course, Walker herself and another lady whose name I can't recall right now. As much as I admire those literatures and they serve a very great purpose, I think that we have literature that we should develop that we have missing, and that is the literature of science fiction. Somehow I think we as a people have sort of overlooked science fiction and seen science fiction as something those other people should do. You need a genre, a literary genre of science fiction. It's very, very important. Maybe we're thrown off by the idea that this is fiction. But science fiction is probably one of the most factually based of the literary genres. Science fiction, to a great extent, is really a speculation based on what is currently happening in science. Science fiction then looks and speculates about the future. Often I ask my class, sometimes I says, do you find it hard to imagine space stations located in Africa and African men and women flying through space and establishing space stations and cities and satellites? Many of them, of course, find that somewhat unrealistic. I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have a science fiction. It doesn't seem real. You see? Now, then I have to say then, but when H.G. Wells and Burns and the other people were writing about flights to the moon and the time machine and all of this, The Europeans were not flying at that time. You see, you must understand man resembles God because man creates like God creates. He creates first in fantasy, and he creates first through imagination, through images, and through a manipulation of symbols. And then the symbols become reality. You see, this building here was first a vision in somebody's mind, a group of symbols and lines, and after the symbols then occurred the concrete reality. So it is the visualization of the fantasy that occurs first. It is the fiction, but the fiction can become incarnate and can become real. So when you rob a people of their imagination, when you dare not leap beyond your current reality, when you dare not dream and visualize, then of course you will not create and bring into reality those things that are necessary to advance you as a people and as a group. And until we can fire up the minds of our children with a fiction, a science fiction, and get them fired up about it, then of course we will continue to drag behind in scientific development. Why is it that the black man today is not master of the world? Too many of us dare not think of ourselves as masters of the world. What you dare dream and visualize, and that's the beautiful thing about the human mind, it tends to bring into being what it imagines, what it visualizes. You say, why is the white man, one of the reasons why the Caucasian has the position he has? Because he dares to dream, and he dares to think of himself as being the master, and thinking of himself as being that, he tries to create conditions to maintain this. We then, if we are to master this world, must begin to fictionalize and fantasize and dream about it and visualize it, so our young boys and girls, when reading our fictions and imaginations, can begin to build the reality and bring it into being. Now then, when we look, many of you probably saw Star Wars, right? And you should see Star Wars. I think Star Wars is an interesting movie. And of course, The Empire Strikes Back, right? Science fiction, what some people say. What do you see in there, though? Where's the black man in that movie? We see black in the movie, right? Of course, we see black playing the role that black always plays, doesn't it? And that, of course, is a symbol of evilness. So, of course, the propaganda is shot right into our minds and our children's minds, who sit there and are subliminally fed again the idea of blackness and evilness and dirtiness and all the other kinds of things that we get in this culture. Darth Vader, the evil one in that, dressed all in black, is also like Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, too. So he's there, but he's not there at the same time. And of course, as we project, and we don't have time to go into all of the things there because there's a lot of current scientific work that's going on right now that was in that movie, such as holography, when you saw the projection of Princess Leia there and her image there, and she's talking. Of course, that's based on very realistic scientific research. And of course, other things that are going on in there. But the thing that you notice in that situation is an absence of white people. Meaning, of course, that as the European speculates about space and outer space, the black man is left out of there. And generally what you see are two kinds of people there. The blonde, blue-eyed boys and heroes and girls there, a bunch of faceless people, and those that are not white are monstrous. You see? Monstrous looking. You know? And of course the greatest monstrosity is when you go into the bar and the music is playing. Yeah? You know what they're with it, ladies and gentlemen. The music is playing and the fights are going on and the raucousness is occurring there. Now then again, you can see consciously and maybe unconsciously, the idea that in this future, as it is conceived by the European, this man, this black man, is left out. Of course, there were complaints about it, and so we got the Empire Strikes Back, which tries to remedy that a little bit, didn't it? By bringing out Billy D. Williams there, who's still halfway a crook, or kind of on the rough side of the law. So we still get this. But what does this have to do with the function of education? It has to do with the fact that in the future, wars will be wars fought in space. And that a people who cannot or will not be able to conquer space and deal with space are going to be a people who are ultimately going to be defeated or perhaps even destroyed. And when we talk about the Star Wars and the ability to fight wars, we have to look at where our people are technologically and educationally. Are we going to be able to defend ourselves as a people against this kind of technology? Now, a lot of people made a joke out of Reagan's statement about the Star Wars, and of course we can see it here headlined on Newsweek. It is not a joke. Star Wars is in the process of being developed at this moment. As a matter of fact, the flights of Columbia, that's what they're about. The flights of the Challenger, these are military flights. These are no weather satellites. These are no communication satellites that can allow you to get 100 channels on your TV set. These are these little side reactions. Of course, this is generally what black people get out of technology, by the way. The playthings. You know, the stereos, the big boxes, and the little playthings is what we get out of technology, while the Caucasian maintains the real power aspects of the technology as such. So then Star Wars is a reality. Those nations who will not be able to defend themselves in space will be nations that will be subjugated to the other nations. And this is what black education must ultimately face and deal with. Not equality here on earth, ladies and gentlemen, because this earth is going out of style fast. What do you look at why is it important, for instance, that Columbia carries 65,000 tons of material? I mean, let's just see how big we can go. What does it mean that a man walks in space and sees how long he can stay out in space? And what does it mean when he's attached to a spaceship and floats in the air and sees how he can manipulate things in the air? Are these games? Of course, we're tempted to look at them as games. You say, well, they could be given more welfare. Well, they're going up. But these people are not concerned with giving more welfare. They're concerned with a general welfare. And they're concerned with their own welfare prior to your own. When you look at 65,000 tons that can be taken into space, you're dealing with the issue as to whether you can take out tons and tons of material that will be needed to build the giant and massive floating cities that you saw in The Empire Strikes Back. You remember that city floating right in the midst of space? These cities will be constructed, and when the Russians, for instance, stay out there 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, you're checking to see how long men can stay in space and not have to come back, and how long they can be depended upon to construct these major satellites and cities in space. When you looked at Star Wars, of course, you saw Darth Vader's big city, this big artificial satellite, which was both a living space and a warship. In the future, of course, we will have those kinds of massive space stations and warships. In the future, then, war will be made from space such that you will be bombed from 22,000 miles out in space. Laser beam, proton beams, and other beams that will rain down. It won't matter whether Africans can fly F-16s. It won't matter whether you can march in tandem and in regiments. It won't matter at all. because unless you're able to build a force in space that will destroy these satellites and these ships on their way down to your countries and on their way down to your nations, you may as well surrender before the war even starts. These satellites are so powerful until now. Of course, you remember the scandal in Britain, where these British guys gave the Russians the secret because these satellites that were miles and miles out in space were listening to the Russians as they conferred in rooms like this, just picking up ordinary conversation. Not only picking up ordinary conversation, of course, photographing all of their military bases, all of their missile bases, all of their troop maneuvers, of course, were being photographed. These satellites are so strong in terms of their photographing ability until they have some that will literally read your license plate from thousands of miles out in space. This is no game going on. This is not about the weather. In fact, if you talk about the weather, of course, one of the major areas of research that's going on now is the control of the weather. This nation in Russia is very much involved in weather research so that weather can be manipulated. As a matter of fact, there's some people who suspect it's being manipulated now. The Mexicans have complained already about intentions of this country to try to manipulate and direct hurricanes and other kinds of things. We are not playing. We as a people must know what we are facing here. Education is a very serious situation here. And therefore we only have, as I can see it, maybe another good 20 or 30 years to get on the ball. The rest we're going to really, I think it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for us to catch up and deal with what's confronting us. This man then is getting ready. We hear some of us talk about, well, if we have a third world war, they're going to blow up the world and the whole of mankind is going to disappear. Another myth, of course. You see, I guess that makes us comfortable quite often. We as blacks, we don't mind suffering anything as long as you can say white people suffer it as well. And I thought about doing a novel one time of how you could destroy all the black people in America by destroying an equivalent number of whites. You see, and as long as you can comfort us with the idea, there are just as many whites dying as there are you dying, then we feel all right. Equality, you see. It doesn't matter. If we die in equal numbers, that's all right, you see. So we've been told equality as a rule and policy. So, of course, they kill each one of these no good whites who they don't need. So they killed 30 million of them. What do they have left here? 80 million or more left, so forth, so on. And we were gone out equal, you see, in this kind of venture. So then we here are confronted with this issue about this Third World War. So this is the idea then, they're going to blow us all up. I don't think that's going to be the case, ladies and gentlemen. Non-whites may be all blown up. Because of what? Because the white man is what? He's getting ready to leave you here. He's getting ready to leave you. He's already planted his flag on the moon. And there's no African that has any claim anywhere in this world. And you know what it means when a flag is planted. The moon has already been staked out. And when these guys dug into the moon, into the core of the moon, it's not a game of just bringing moon rock back, but what does that moon rock contain? Does it contain strategic metals? Does it contain other strategic materials that can be mined? Of course, if you read Science Digest, and that's another thing, we just don't read enough science. You read Science Digest a few months back, and you have a whole issue about mining the planets. How are we going to mine the other planets and get the resources from the other planets? And of course, when you have big space cities and colonies and so forth, you will mine those planets, and those planets will be used to fuel these massive artificial satellites. Where is the black man going to be during those times? They will not be mining Africa, which will be sucked up. What is going to happen to the black man once the metals and materials are sucked out of the African continent? What is going to happen to us when the metals and materials are sucked from under the oceans? What is going to happen to us when the earth is so polluted and so filled with radiation and other things that it is basically uninhabitable, and we see it headed that way. We talk about dioxins and PCBs and this and that, and right now we see where it is going, a pollution of the earth and a destruction of the earth. Sometimes I'm tempted to think that those mutants that we saw in that cafe represent some of those mutants that had to stay back on earth and mutated as a result of the fact of the radiation of World War III. Monsters having been created because of the rearrangement of their genetic systems as such. This man, this Caucasian man now, is already basically in the position to leave us here. As I often sort of joke, I can see us now as blacks walking around picketing for fair planets. We want to move. Yes, we want to live on the moon just like you live on the moon. We'll be picketing throughout the next forever, picketing as they move from one planet to the next when we be moving in behind them. Picketing. Or else, some of us now, there's one black guy is going to take a trip in July, isn't he? Right? Bluefoot, I think. Bluefoot, right. And that's going to make us, of course, feel real good. The same old game, though, this sidekickism that blacks always play. You look on TV, always black men is a sidekick, a carry along. And we say, look, you might go out there with them. They'll take us along out there, mascots and all. But also, quite often what will happen, even if we went out there, we will not have gone out there without carrying our second-class status with us. It's still going to be the second in command or the second fiddle or something along with dragging along. This is the reason why it's not important enough. It's not just good enough for us to go along with them on the trip. We must be capable of making the trip ourselves and have an independent force. You see, or else the old game continues. So black second-classism continues right across the satellites and right on across the universe. You see? And so when we talk about then the education of black children, we are not talking about just preparing children for jobs or just for qualifying them. We are not talking about just equality and so forth. We are talking about the survival of our people and the ability of our people to protect their interest. We have been sold a bogus progress and a bogus equality, particularly by many of our leaders. In fact, the whole selling of equality is a bogus game. You see? I want to have the same as they got. I want to be equal with them. That's very thoughtless, ladies and gentlemen. It's about being superior. Now, I know that's right to me, but it's about being superior.
That's right.
You see, a whole different ball game, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment or two. The thing that we must recognize then is that we must urge the education of our children is urgent. Urgent, I mean urgent. We are in a state of emergency at this point. And consequently then, it means that we have to take control of the education of our children and prepare them for what we see coming up in that future. And of course, for what we see that is happening right now that leads into the future itself. The other thing that we must look at, of course, is what I call sometimes constancies. A major leap in the intellectual development of a child is that child's ability to see that many things stay the same despite the fact that they appear to change. You see, you go into Piaget, who talks a great deal about the intellectual development of the child, and he talks about the stage of the child when you can easily deceive it. You can take 2 equal glasses of water, and you ask the child, are they equal amounts, and it will say yes. And you take 1 glass and pour it into a tall cylinder, and it will say, oh, the cylinder either contains more or the other glass contains more, even though it looks right at the fact that you've just taken 1 glass and poured it in there. But it is deceived by what it sees, because it can only concentrate on one aspect of reality. And therefore, it's taken along by obvious and apparent changes, you see. We find, of course, in many of us as adults, we still have not gotten out of this kind of thing. There are many of us who believe that we as a people have progressed, that we are really further along than we were in slavery. You see? And of course we can talk about the few things that we do. We talk about, they're not lynching us anymore, and they're not, they don't have us in chattel slavery anymore. That's nice. And of course now we have increased opportunity. And we like to talk about the specialties that we're in. We go to various colleges now, and we're computer technologists, and we're, this, and we're that. And yet you recognize that in slavery, black people were specialists then. Yeah, every black man didn't pick cotton. Not at all. You had blacksmiths, carpenters, supervisors, domestic people, craftsmen. In fact, in certain aspects of the country, you had more skilled black people during Reconstruction than you had whites. So the idea of blacks having skills and specialties is not new at all. It's the same old game. And for the same reason. And that reason is to maximize the profits of the master. And when we talk about getting jobs and so forth and all of our specialties, recognize it's the same ball game to maximize the profit of IBM and all the rest of these big things that we're going to work for. When I think about IBM and all these big companies, it reminds me of perhaps many blacks in slavery who got off because they worked for the big plantation. And they'd come down on the other slaves there who worked for the little plantations. So if you worked for Mr. Charlie, who had 100 slaves, you felt better than the man who had 2 or 3. Being slaves, of course, just the same. And there's some of us, we work for RPM, I work for so, somehow that makes me better if you're working, down the street there with maybe 1 or 2 employees. But the old game is the same. Thank you very much. The old game is maximizing profits. The other part of the old game is, though, and the constants, and this is what we have to look at. You have to get beyond the obvious changes and look behind those changes. And say, well, what really has changed? And you recognize the most basic things have not changed. As a matter of fact, the apparent changes have been put in place to maintain the basic ones. You see? And I often tell people, racism is going out of style, not because the white man is better, but because he has a better weapon for maintaining his racial position. You see, the racism is being given up, not necessarily because we're so militant, that's a part of it. I'm not discrediting our efforts, but also because there's a recognition that overt racism is no longer necessary to maintain control of our people. As a matter of fact, it's non-racism, apparent non-racism, that is the best way of maintaining racist control. Thank you. Now, the thing you have to look at then is the power relationship. Has the power relationship between African people and Europeans changed? You see? This is the issue you must look at. Has it changed, you see? Are we, and I'd like to put it in this question, are we as Africans in any better position to defend our children and ourselves against enslavement today than our forefathers were 400 years ago? This is what you have to look at. If the Europeans today decided that they would come right here in this room and take us right into slavery, into concentration camps, or decide to remove us, can we defend ourselves? Can we defend our children? What black nation can come to our defense? Is there any African nation, another nation that can stand up and defend our rights? That has not changed, ladies and gentlemen. Despite all the African governments and all of the so-called independent movements and all the governors and mayors and all of this other stuff we've elected, the old power game is the same. Nothing has moved. The ability to protect yourself is still vulnerable. The Europeans have meetings at Helsinki, right? And they have meetings at this. And of course, we're never told, of course, that you have the superficial meeting and then you have the secret ones. that you don't hear about. And these are the ones, so that you get a lot of publicity about the surface stuff. But what are the Europeans discussing in those chambers that doesn't get out to us? I could see, often you may wonder if Andropov and Reagan are just playing games with the world. Let's play warlike, and this way we can whip up our people to do anything we want them to do. Right? The Russians feel threatened, and you can get the Russians to do what, and you can get them in armies and droves. If you whip up a fear about the United States, people will sacrifice money, time, lives, limbs, and everything to the cause. Fall in line. The same thing in this country. So what do? Let's just keep up noise, and this way we control. What about one day Andropov and Reagan meet and say, we're tired of these Africans. Why do we have to we're not giving them anything anyway. But why should we even put up with them? What do we need them for? Back, in the 70s there was a discussion of triage, right? Lifeboat ethics. The whole issue of the debate is they're concerned whether we should just let some nations completely fade away and die, based on the idea that a lifeboat only has so much space for so many people, and if you have a bunch of people floating around in the water, you have to make a decision who you're going to let in the boat and who's going to have to stay out and drown. And if you look at Earth as a lifeboat that can only contain so much life and can only support so many people, particularly if you're looking at it on the level of a style of life, where some people on this boat want to maintain a very high style of life and don't want to give it up, so therefore share with other people, the issue becomes that maybe we should let these nations just fade away and die and forget about it. And it's based on the issue of who can contribute to our progress or not. And naturally we look around at our nations and begin to wonder, why should we carry these people along? And so Andropov and Reagan convened and said, well, let's get rid of these people. Why should we keep them? Of course, we know that the neutron bomb was developed for the third world. Even though they try to deceive you and try to say, we're developing this bomb because the Russians have more tanks than us in Eastern Europe, and this way we can get over their tank superiority, But of course, when you read the account of the guy who developed the neutron bomb, it was obvious that the neutron bomb was developed for the third world, to be used against the third world, so-called. Most beautifully over the Arab countries, because it succeeds in doing what? Blowing the Arabs away and leaving the oil well standing. Leaving the infrastructure, the fuel infrastructure there, while ridding the land of its people. Why couldn't that be, of course, applied to the rest of the African continent? You see? This is the kind of world, you see, that our children, and the kind of possibilities that our children must face. And these are the kinds of possibilities that they must be prepared to handle. And this is why the education of our children, you see, can't even be the same education. Because we're not preparing for the same thing these other people are preparing for. And this is the reason why education in the black community should be very deadly serious at this point, you see. So this constancy, and the European, despite all of the appearances, is going to try to maintain power. And he's going to change the appearances to maintain that power. When I speak before many black college audiences, I tell them up front that, of course, you are here to become the black face that's going to be put on white power. That black educated elite, that's its major function, is to confuse the black masses and to deceive these masses into thinking that we actually are sharing in the power and that we actually have some real stake in the society. The same way we, of course, we have in the neo-colonial tradition. To put in front of the people neo-colonialist leaders whose economies and whose lifelines are still controlled by Europeans. to deceive the African masses into thinking that independence actually exists. So when there is unrest, they will attack the puppet. And yet the European will continue to extract the wealth from the countries. How does he get out of Africa? Then he gets out of Africa because it becomes cheaper to put these puppets up in front of the people than it does for him to stay there with a whole set of troops. So his appearance appears to get better. He's just another part of the game. These Europeans have found, for instance, that they could, we hear some of our countries say, well, in order to go into business, the country itself has to own at least 50% or 51% of whatever industry comes into it. And that sounds very nice and sweet, doesn't it? So we can go into many of our African countries, other countries, third world countries, and you can say, well, the government owns part of this. But it's a charade. What does it mean to own it? Basically, it means just to own the trouble that's going to come out of it. How's it happen? The European has found that he can make as much money or more money by owning 25% of a company than he could by owning the whole thing. Because he's going to supply quite often the so-called management. You can own it, but I'm going to run it. And he pays his managers tremendous salary, so he still robs the country, even though it's nominally under your control. Not only does he do that, he still sells the parts and the industrial parts and technology that must go into that company. And he will sell those parts and that technology at exorbitant prices and will deliver them when he feels like it, if he feels like it or not. Or he can keep the company that you own a majority in technologically behind other countries as such. So then when your workers go on strike and so forth, they strike against the government or strike against the apparent owners of the industry, and that government fights and beats those strikers down and do so forth, and the European still there sucks the money out. So the apparent lack of racism, ladies and gentlemen, see, it's this kind of intelligence that a black education must get us into, so that we can look beyond appearances. We look at Ghana today almost at the point of total destabilization. And yet, if you read the New York Times a few weeks back, you hear about these chocolate freaks, right? The chocolate addicts now, people who just so love chocolate so much. That's the new in thing now, getting hung up on chocolates. And you have to, they're having fits with chocolate. You go down to Bloomingdale's chocolate sale for more than $20 a pound. Very expensive. Nestle, of course, owns 60% of the whole chocolate output, cocoa beans and all that kind of stuff. And yet, when you look at a major supplier of cocoa beans, Ghana, you see a people who have to work one full day to buy one egg. One egg, ladies and gentlemen. And so when I look at hot chocolate, man, I can't feel good, What's going on here? Independence? Where is it? It has not yet come into being. For black people, liberation has not yet come into being, ladies and gentlemen. But we have to watch it because a lot of us are deceived by appearances. The other constancy that's going to maintain itself despite appearances will be dependency. Maintaining our people in a dependent state. And of course, that's one of the reasons why we have to watch integrationism and assimilationism to a very great extent. Because quite often, instead of strengthening us, it can weaken us. Quite often, nothing has changed, so we get more jobs, so we make a little better income and so forth. But who still owns the company? Who still owns the means of production? Who still has the military power? Who is determining the international and national policy of the world? This is the issue that we have to focus upon. And quite often we can become so dependent and so comfortable with our being so-called accepted and with our so-called equality until we don't prepare for the possibility that things may change drastically. I often must warn people that there are two words, integration and disintegration. You see, our leaders have deceived us into thinking that once we get these people to love us and we start holding hands with them and sleeping with them and marrying them and, everything's going to be all right, as if this cannot be what? Reversed. As if this cannot change. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, we're going through a second Reconstruction now, aren't we? Yeah, this is the second Reconstruction. There's nothing new about what we're going through basically at this point. We've had black mayors before. We've had blacks who were governors. We've had black legislators before. In fact, we don't have quite as many in some instances that we had before. We had black corporate owners before. We had blacks running back and forth to Washington and doing big deals before. This is nothing new. We voted before in this country. And that was betrayed, and it took us over 100 years to get back basically to the same spot we were in the 1870s. And we're essentially back at that point now. What guarantees us that it won't go through the cycle again? You see? And this is the possibility we have faced. Granted, it may not occur, but what if it does? Did you recognize this possibility? They were in the universities. They owned tremendous holdings of wealth. Did this prevent them from getting gassed at some time? They were gassed anyway. And he was so frightened by that situation that the Jew went and took somebody else's land. And said, you're not going to catch me out again depending upon you to take care of my interests. I'm going to have a nation or something so that I can defend my people. And I don't care how nice you are to me. I'm still going to take care of myself. But we must recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that we as African Americans are on a very thin thread here. Very thin. Only the so-called quote-unquote goodwill or whatever it is among these Caucasians. And we know how shaky that is. Is keeping us alive at this moment. And don't deceive yourself into thinking that you are needed. All of us, go with that thing. They need us, and therefore they're going to keep us. All that kind of nonsense. That is utter nonsense. I think about I was reading here back about an automated plant in Japan turning out 1,300 cars a day with 67 employees. That's 1,300 fully assembled cars with 67 employees. Okay? So this business about being needed is a very shaky foundation to put your future on. In fact, we're going to need fewer and fewer people, period. The other thing, of course, is that the Caucasian still wants to maintain the ability to shape the personality of our people. I have said it before and I will say it again. The African American, to a large extent, is an artificial man. We are a creation, not only the African American, generally pretty much on a worldwide basis, a creation of another people. And we have to look at that fact, that we have been shaped to fit within the systems of another people. I often have said that the best way to understand the psychology of the black child, which is also the psychology of the black adult because they're one and the same, is of course to understand the psychology of brainwashing. We are a brainwashed people. We are a sick people. Neurotic and psychotic. Now that seems, certainly, if you're shaped by neurotic and psychotic and crazy people, you reflect their own craziness and their own madness. You see? And in order to shape a people, you have to have control of their environment. We often talk about the skin of a rat. How do you make that rat do what it does? By having control of its very existence and reinforcing it according to a plan and according to a program. When we recognize and we look at the skin of a rat, we will see that the black ghettos the world over are skinner boxes, and that we are the rats in those boxes. And you will look at a reinforcement program put into being to shape our characters, personalities, perception, social relationships, and everything so as to fit within the overall plan of the European. So this shaping process continues. You can look at it in the African slave. What happens here with the African, and how do you bring about brainwashing, and how do you really begin to change a person's personality? Of course, one of the major things you must do is put them under stress. Heavy stress. Heavy stress and anxiety has the effect of disorganizing an individual, as many of you have taken the exam know. Right? It doesn't matter how well you study quite often. If you let that anxiety build up too much, your whole memory goes out. Your ability even sometimes to control your current situation goes out. Everything that you've learned in your past becomes useless when that anxiety reaches a certain level of development. Let's look at the African man for a moment and see how this happens. If you want to run if you really want to brainwash a person and so forth, of course one of the things you should do is arrest them in a way that they don't even know what they're being arrested for. Why are you taking me in? What is this? I've done nothing, and just haul them in anyway, and refuse to tell them. Puzzle. Right away confusion is in their mind. And the mind now is opening up to be suggestible. The more and more you confuse. The other thing, of course, is to arrest them at night. 2 o'clock in the morning. To bang on the door and knocking the door down, you open the door and wham, somebody's in there and they got you hustling you out. Now you hustle out, no one knows that you're gone. You're wondering if your neighbors don't see you gone, your family don't know where you are. And now you're completely cut off and isolated from everything and everybody that you know. Thus you don't know what these people are going to do with you. They got you down there in this dungeon somewhere. They're threatening you and terrorizing you. You don't understand why you're there. You don't understand what they're asking. You don't understand what they're getting after. And now that you have no one to call on, you can't call your lawyer, you can't call your family, nothing that you knew in the past can work for you. Helplessness, powerlessness, and dependency sets in. You are in the hands of your captor. And now the basis for interrogation, indoctrination begins. When we look at this African man taken into a new world that he knows nothing about, so marched, put into the high states of fatigue, many people dying, separated from friend, family, separated even from his God. You know what a terrifying feeling it is to feel that you're deserted by your God? When you've organized your whole life around the idea that this God is going to take care of you, and he's brought you the rain and the wind and all these other wonderful things, and all of a sudden you call out and he doesn't even, or she, whatever it is you worship, doesn't even see to hear you either and desert you? What kind of despair that brings to the mind of the individual? What it means then when you're separated from the elders who used to instruct you and counsel you and interpret the world for you and give you some kind of guide, and they're not there to help you out either. Mom is not there, dad is not there, the village is not there. The whole structure and social structure which used to make sense out of life for you is absent. You're with a bunch of people who don't understand your language, nothing you say. You're with another bunch who are saying things, you don't understand what they're saying, but they're pushing you, shoving you, marching you, and moving you forward. Shock, bewilderment. And now taken across this ocean and taken into a new system that you don't understand without any of the supports. Nothing that you've known previously, does you any good. Hopeless and powerless. Your captor becomes, in a sense, your savior. In a strange sort of way. Okay. You see? And now he's going to tell you He's getting ready to introduce you into a new set of rules and regulations that are going to run your life. Because he's knocked the other ones out of you now. And he's going to implant a new set. When you terrorize people to a certain degree and put them in such a degree, they become very suggestible. You see, and open. And you get them to learn not in terms of reason, but they learn emotionally. They learn, as a matter of fact, in a state of mind where their critical faculties have gone and their ability to evaluate has disappeared. And the kind of learning that's going to be put into their head quite often is no longer subject to logical criticism. You see? And I wish we have sometimes talk about this in the future a little bit. You know, sometimes I see it as the way sometimes we as parents work with our children. Through fear. And here you are, this giant adult, you know, sometimes I think we forget, you know, how maybe we look to children. Particularly a small and helpless child is standing in front of you, and that child, and if you got this ferocious look on your face, and they don't know whether you're going to kill them or not, and quite often they think you are going to kill them, you know, and there's that terror there. Now, you don't have to tell them reasonably what you want them to do or why you want them to do it. What do you say? Do what I say. Do. Don't even question it. And if you do what I say do, and if you follow what I say follow, then you will be relieved of the horror that you're experiencing right now. And then quite often then the child learns this thing unemotional, learn it without any reason, and it's implanted into the mind, and all it knows is if I behave this way, I don't have to suffer the horror and pain. As a matter of fact, it becomes thankful to you for not killing it. So even the terrorizer builds in an ambivalent attitude in the terrorized individual. This is why quite often even an abused child attaches itself even to the abusing parent. You see? And because there's a certain level of relief even in the moment of terror. But it's bought at the price of obedience and at the price, of course, of learning rules and regulations and other kinds of things. I wish we had time to talk about how this leads into integrationism and those people who want to get these people to love them. You know? One of the great puzzles, we can't do it, we don't have the time. One of the great puzzles we have, because a lot of people have, why is it that many black people do not really have very strong rage against whites? Looking at what has happened to us in this experience. You see, of course, that's part of the puzzle you run into even as a worker with abused children. You'd be quite surprised that many of these children do not have the kind of rage against parents who really abuse them that you would think that they would have. But you see, even strong emotions such as hatred, such as fear and terror, can attach you to the person who terrorizes you. That person can become the very center of your consciousness. What you fear also manipulates you in many ways. And the love of that individual and the acceptance by that individual can become the chief motive of your life. I can see many black adults and other adults who are 30, 40, and 50 years old are still trying to get mama to love them. Still working with the issue of can I get mama to love them? Neglect their own family, neglect their own personal growth, neglect what's their own reality, and they're still fighting old wounds. You see, a negative thing, a negative experience, and ladies and gentlemen, we're finding out these experiences begin even in the womb. And not only do they begin in the womb, they begin even at the point of birth. Strangely enough, the victim can become a part of being victimized. Because once you traumatize a person and create such conflict into that individual, you bias that individual's brain. And you bias their perception of reality. And quite often then they will approach reality, and they will perceive reality in terms of the tremendous traumatic event that occurred in their lives. And these traumas have ways of sucking into themselves many things that go on in life. In fact, almost everything quite often becomes related to the original trauma, and it's brought in to the original trauma. And each trauma after that is complexed into the original one. Even if it's one of displeasure. An unresolved trauma, for instance, you know how you get into a conflict and another person is around, or some other people, you try to bring them in to get on one side or the other? Quite often the individual who's severely traumatized relates to people throughout life in this way. Which side of this conflict that's going on in my mind are you going to be on? Quite often they're looked at symbolically. Let me give you a quick case here. There was one man there who had a quirk. And that quirk was that he liked other men in black suits. And then he wanted those men to take him, lock him up in a dark cell, tie him up, and torture him. You know, one of these very perverted spirits here. And in fact, he had a great sensitivity for this. He could go to the parks and into the toilets and to wherever, you know, people roam and pick those kind of people out. And he had some terrifying ones sometimes. One guy, he got to riding on the train with him. They were going up to his place there, and he was going to torture him the way he wanted to be tortured. And the guy had a knapsack there, and this guy said, well, I'm going to the bathroom. He said, I better check out this knapsack while this guy's going to the bathroom here. Opens it up. There's a butcher knife in there and a meat cleaver. And becomes sensitized in to wanting to be to darkness, to people who are in darkness, and to the possibility that somebody is going to lock him up and do this thing to him. Even though you see that as a traumatic event, it becomes a basis for his connection with these people, despite the fact that there's a negative experience with it. He becomes attached. His mind becomes sensitized to this kind of thing. And he repeats, in a way, the original experience over and over and over again. And he brings in people as he meets into that situation over and over again. The neurotic person never sees another person as a real person. They're always symbolic in one way or the other. You see? So then, quite often this torture and this stuff that we've been through has attached too many of us to our torturer. You see? Has sensitized us, has made it very important to us that this person loves us like a torturous mother or father. Nothing else has quite the priority other than that we get these people to accept us and see how real and human we are. And you'll often see the neglected child in the relationship. Every time mama is sick, even though mama treat her like a dog, she's right there, serving. And the one that mama spoiled probably not even come to the house, don't even worry about it. But mama still loves them. You know, right there on the deathbed, they're still there. They're looking for one day mama to say, oh, you know, I mistook you. I know now you're just a wonderful daughter. And, you know, I love you so much and forgive me and I'm going to accept you. But somehow, quite often, it never comes, does it? It never occurs. And then quite often after all this service, mama still wills her stuff to the other ones. You're caught up in bitterness. So it reminds me of our people, you know, attached to this people. We died for you in the Revolutionary War. We died for you in the Civil War. We died for you in the Korean War. In fact, we protested to make you put us in the army. You know, and send our sons over and get them killed and mangled and destroyed. We went to World War. And then so we can come back and say, see what I've done for you. See what great sacrifices. See what great love. Now, don't you feel ashamed of yourself? Why don't you love me and come back, and take me in? And we have then, many of us, who see this as the ultimate priority of our lives, of being loved and being accepted and being seen by people who do not deserve it, who not deserve our love and our acceptance. So this kind of brainwashing continued into the Afghanistan and placed in many of us then these kind of priorities. And we have people then who come out with the same values, the same outlooks, going for the same goals, want the same education, want the same, all immediately. I want the same. Who can't think of alternatives to what exists? Who can't say, hey, maybe we want something different, and maybe that difference is even better. You see? No, it goes down into a psychology. In fact, it's often, I used to talk to some psychologists who they would work their lives out trying to prove how the black child is the same as the white child. How similar they are. But ladies and gentlemen, it's the sameness that's killing you. As a matter of fact, one of the means by which we are going to be manipulated is that we're going to be promised and given the same. Equality is a bogus game. How we can use the illustration here of if you have two beakers filled with water and one is at this level and one is at the other level, and you pour the same amount of water in, and what do you get? A maintenance of what? The same inequality. Pouring the same in two unequal quantities does not equal equality, ladies and gentlemen. It maintains the difference. You may have more than you had before, but in relative to the other person, you're still just as far away from them. And therefore, many of our leaders and others will come to us saying, well, you should get the same and the equal thing, you see, that these other people get. And many of them will go along with that philosophy, because in the end, it means that you never catch up. Right. You see? And so sameness becomes a philosophy of life. You pray to the same Jesus the white man prays to. But Jesus is going to bless him more than bless you, Oh, yeah. He's going to bless you. He's going to bless him every time. Every time. And you know why? Because you believe the same as he does. Why is it the same? You see, the same idea in a different context leads to unequal results. The thing you must see, it is not the idea that is important, but the context in which the idea operates. So that the same idea can have completely opposite effects depending upon the context in which it operates. The same idea then that the powerful carriage will maintain their power and maintain the powerlessness of the powerless. You see? So the idea here then is a difference. So you pray to Jesus and you pray and you believe in him. That's nice. I'm not attacking that. And then you believe the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor, and this and that. Wonderful. Except for one thing, when another people stolen everything from you and got everything, that same belief then is a defensive morality for him. All right. This is why the most evil people are going to be the first to teach morality. And the most evil, destructive nation on earth has the most evangelists all over the globe. As a matter of fact, their evangelists are in front of them, as we've seen in history. You see? And they're going to leave you with the morality. And he can be quite sincere. So once that gets middle class, gets you to believe thou shalt not steal, and should be meek and wait for your reward in heaven, and all of that, then that protects his own interest. Because if you really believe that stuff, he can sleep at night over his stolen goods. Because he knows that you're so moral, you're not going to come and take it back from him. You're going to be so nice and wait for your reward. You're not going to, even if you complain a little bit about it, that's all right. You're going to let it go on because, whoever's going to. So it plays two roles, keeping you powerless and keeping the other people in power. The same kind of game with individualism. You do your thing and I do mine. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no individual freedom without your group being free. Your individuality, it must be protected by your group and by the power of your group. It is an illusion for you to think that you as an individual can be free as long as your people are not free. And this group, you see, likes to run up on us in this concept of individualism. It's beautiful, ladies and gentlemen, because if they can individualize every other ethnic group, they can maintain that group in fragmentation. Because they know it is organization and identity and unity as nations and people that will destroy them, not a group of individuals. So then you come in here and get brainwashed and you accept this value on face without recognizing that it's going to have the complete opposite effect upon you depending upon where your level is and upon them depending upon where they are. It's the same game that's run on our nations across the world. Free markets, free competition. There should be no restriction between nations. We should trade freely and across barriers and so forth. Of course, you saw the United States play that game very well. That sounds very nice, doesn't it? But again, you recognize that is a philosophy of people who have what? Money. Yeah, who's got money, see? Now, he wants a free market. Now, look what the United States is trying to do with Japan. They're trying to keep them out. They're putting up barriers. They're doing all these kind of things. But you see, while they had the ball in their hands, they were for free markets all over the place because that opens up everybody else's country for them. And since they have now the economic advantage and the money, free markets becomes a wonderful idea. So consequently, it's that sameness business that is destroying our people. And it is that kind of philosophy that was implanted into the heads of our people during this brainwashing session of slavery and continues to this very day. Brainwashing, of course, is going on right now. So we move from slavery to racism, which I've told you before. That's kind of going out of style, but the old game is still played. It's played in the name of economics and economic opportunity and this kind of stuff. And of course, when we look at our children, what do we find here? You see, the major question, the major thing that you should look at as to why our children do not learn as well in school, regardless of whether you put them in integrated schools or this kind of school or other, is that, ladies and gentlemen, they must not learn. You see? They must not learn. Okay? We often forget that the European is only 10 or 20% of the world's population. By the 1990s, it would be about 10% of the world's population. It's a doggone shame that these people who have no resources to speak of under their globe, under their earth, and of course you look at the Japanese, so basically a rock out there, nothing under it. And we have a reverse situation here of the nations with the most natural wealth have the poorest people, and the nations with nothing are the richest. And the people who are in control are the smallest minority in the world. Now, how is it then that this small group of people can manipulate this other group of people? They basically can manipulate them other than, of course, direct military control, which we've seen is playing out, but used in other ways. It must be in part based upon the ignorance of those people. You see? As I've often said, in order for us as people to be in the conditions we're in, we must be out of our minds.
I hear you, brother.
Think about it.
Yes, sir.
We must be out of our minds. I want you to think about that for a minute, because I know it seems a little peculiar. Yeah. You got to be out of your minds. This little group of people over there whose countries is hardly bigger than Texas when you put them all together, And 90% of these people of color, are ruled and regulated by this group. You know these people have to be out of their minds? They could almost run over these people if they wanted to. Just by force of numbers, without even weaponry. You have to be out of your mind. The brother mentions I'm writing a book now on black psychotherapy. And it's based on that idea that blacks have to be out of their minds. The craziness must be built in. Do you recognize that if these people, these so-called third world people, could think as well or better than the Europeans, they would be over today? That if we could think and move into abstractions and handle these symbols, and if we then on top of that could unite as a group and work as a group, it would be the end for this person. So consequently, in order for him to maintain this must not be allowed to occur. The ability to think abstractly, constructively, conceptually, and to unite emotionally and as a group and as an organized people must not be allowed to come into existence. Because if it did, it would end European domination. So consequently, you will see it in the children. And it must begin very early, that the ability to think and reason and to handle symbols and to see relationships and to look behind appearances, as I've talked about, must not be allowed to exist in those children. So that as adults, they can't see the game that's run on them. They cannot understand and look behind the appearances of propaganda. They must not be able to recognize and the game for what it is and to build for themselves and to unite and set themselves up in such a way so as to destroy their enemies. So that ability must be out. And consequently you see it knocked right out of our children. What is it you see in the Garden of Eden? How does the devil gain control? How is paradise lost? Through deception, through a lie, through a reversal of truth. The devil comes in and reverses the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, the world you live in today is a world constructed of lies.
That's right.
It is built on lies. It is reversed. It is reversed. Completely reversed. The world is perfect. It's perfect. See, a lot of people at first say, how can you say it's perfect when we see all the things that go on? But you see, this is again, you see, the black education must be an education that questions every assumption that you have in your mind. There must not be a one that is left unquestioned. In fact, it's the ones that appear self-evident that should be the first one to come up for scrutiny. You see? The one that you don't bother, everybody knows that. That's the one that's got you going. You see? Don't confuse perfection with goodness. You see, you can be perfectly evil. See, a lot of people say, we're perfect. We used to use the perfect meaning good. The best. No, perfection has nothing to do with good or evilness. It has to do with a lawful relationship between things. An invariable lawful relationship between things. Where something invariably follows another thing. That's perfection. Not good, not bad. That is perfection. So when you go to shoot that basketball at a hoop, it doesn't go in. You say, I made an error. Oh, no error is made there. It's perfect. Why? Because the ball goes exactly where it is supposed to go. When you add up all of the forces acting up on it, what is going to happen? It goes exactly where it's supposed to go. It may not go where you intended for it to go, but it goes exactly where it's supposed to go. Everything goes that way. It happens exactly the way it's supposed to happen. It's built that way. Now, what do I mean by that then? This world is perfect. The misery you see in it, The rape, robbery, and killing, and war, and death, and mistrust, and racism, and all the other stuff is a perfect follow-up to the perception that people have of each other. It must follow that if you see someone as being different from you and as being your enemy, what is going to flow out of that ultimately? War. It follows perfectly from that, ladies and gentlemen. That's why Jesus tells you what? Love thy neighbor what? As thyself. You must not see a difference between your neighbor and yourself. You must be at one with what? The universe. And when you can then see yourself as being one and the universe as being one, then there's a whole different way of relating. Different things would follow from that. But if you see the neighbor separate and as an enemy, you see the neighbor in the racist terms, you see the neighbors being inferior, superior, what must follow? War, death, murder, and everything will follow perfectly from that state of mind. Think today what would happen if we reversed the way we think and the way we relate to each other as people. Think today if we had some Christians in the world. What would be? Yeah, we don't have any Christians in the world. In fact, we don't hardly have any other religious groups in the world either, to tell you the truth. Hold on, we don't listen. Think what would happen if this country, which claims to be a Christian country, really followed the precept. I wouldn't even have to be here lecturing today, would I? The fact that I'm here lecturing today is due to the fact that people are unchristian and perceive the world the way they do it. Yeah. You know, a lot of us are in church, but you're not Christian. You know, how many of you would be nailed to the cross and say, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what to do? That's what Christ did. How many can be spit on in the face and slapped and misaccused and all the other kind of things? How could he say that? He could say that because he recognized that his persecutors were acting out of ignorance. He could say that because he recognized that they could not what? Act in any other way, given what? Their state of mind. You see, if they had a different state of mind and a different consciousness, then they would not have been nailing him to that cross. So then he could say, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because if they really knew what was happening, they couldn't do it. How many of us are not? A whole different world. The world is reversed. Very reversed. If we change our ways of thinking and we're Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever you want to be, because all of them basically teach peace, love, the oneness, and all of this kind of thing, if those believers of those groups, wouldn't you have a very different world today, ladies and gentlemen? Certainly. That's why Christ says what? You must be born again. What does being born again mean? It means you must reverse your way of dealing with the world and yourself and relating to other people. You must look upon the life that you're leading as a sinner as one that is totally unacceptable, wretched, and causing you trouble and the world trouble. And you must see yourself in a different light, take on a new name, relate to people in different ways, and perceive people in different ways. And if then this were the case, then the world would change. One time I was with a young lady there. Jokingly, we were walking down the street and I said, well, let's go in here and look at this movie, a little pornographic movie, you know. What kind of girl do you think I am? Went all into tears, you know. Whoa. She was crying out, oh man, she was really insulted that I would take her and even mention that she would go to one of those nasty movies. Those dirty things. Think about it though. Think about it a little bit though, you know. Then we went down the street and we saw this thing, I forget the name of it now. This guy had a big stick beating people in the head, shooting and blood spattering everywhere, snatching eyes out and chopping them and carrying on. You know? And she thought she was normal. Because this is what normal people do. You know? You see, people confuse normality with health, don't they? Normality and health, ladies and gentlemen, is not the same thing, just like perfection and goodness are not the same thing. Don't let people confuse you and say because you're normal you're not crazy. No, it means you're normally crazy like all the rest of us. You know? In a world of one-legged men, the norm is one leg, isn't it? It doesn't say, though, the norm is that's the way it should be. But this is the kind of deception. He's normal. She's normal. Look, ladies and gentlemen, what the normal people have brought us in this world today. Look at this world of normal people. Right? So it becomes terrible for your child to see people trying to bring each other a little happiness, loving each other, hugging each other, kissing each other, being nice to each other. I'm talking about a nice pornography movie now, not one of those vicious types. That's terrible. That's nasty. That's unclean. But it's not unclean to sit them in front of a TV and watch rapes and robberies and murders and killing and war and so forth and so on. So then if this is what normal people watch. Murder, death, destruction. But let's not have them watching too much loving and stuff going on. That's too bad. There's no wonder then you got a world of war carried on by whom? Normal people. See? Killing and death flowing out of normality. What a reversal. Of course, in a nation that depends upon war, death, and destruction, what you want the children to think is what? That war, death, and destruction is what? Normal. So you fill them with a diet of normal war, death, and destruction. You give them toys and the whole bit there, and so forth. So it doesn't matter if they're hung up sexually and so forth. That's too bad. Because as long as they're ready to go to the army when Sam calls them and march them out and so forth. Normal means you're normally suggestive, and all Uncle Sam has to do is put from a post is point a finger at you and says, Uncle Sam wants you, and you come right in. Because this is what normal people do. It doesn't matter that you can start the war. It doesn't matter that you don't know what the war is about. It doesn't matter that the war is there to protect Rockefeller properties and to protect rich people who are never going to get hurt or killed. It doesn't matter that some people are not going to come back. Others will have faces torn off, limbs torn apart, minds messed up. Uncle Sam wants you. That's what normal people do. You see? And this is the kind of world that has been put in upon us. And this is the kind of fat game that has been run upon us for generations upon generations.